Friday nights in Ravenhill City were supposed to be loud, reckless, and forgettable. But for Noah Caldwell, this one would leave a mark. Quite literally. He lay on a stiff gurney under the humming fluorescent lights of St. Emery's ER, the sharp sting of antiseptic barely noticeable compared to the dull, persistent burn along his side. His dress shirt clung to him like wet paper, soaked through with blood. He'd bought it that morning. Now, it was just another casualty of a decision he didn't regret, but one that definitely hurt. All he did was step between a waitress and a man who had crossed the line. He hadn't expected gratitude, but he hadn't expected a shattered glass to slash across his ribs either. His driver had begged him to let someone patch it up. Noah would have preferred going straight back to his loft in Eastbrook Tower, but for once, he hadn't argued. The curtain pulled open, and in walked the calm in the chaos. She wasn't what he expected. No rushed footsteps, no distracted glances, just quiet, focused presence. A woman in a white coat with a clipboard in one hand and confidence in the other. Her name tag read Dr. Liana Hart, but it was the steadiness in her eyes that told him she'd seen worse than this and hadn't flinched. She didn't smile. She didn't ask how he was. She just said, "Let's take a look," as she reached for her gloves. He raised an eyebrow. "No introductions?" "Your blood's soaking the sheets," she replied, already assessing the wound. "We can exchange pleasantries later." He laughed, just a little. Not from amusement, but because it was the first thing tonight that felt real. As he slowly unbuttoned what was left of his shirt, he caught the briefest pause in her movement. Her gaze flicked to the lean lines of his chest, carved by years in the ring, mapped with old scars and quiet stories. She didn't linger, though, just cleared her throat and got back to work. "You'll need a few stitches. The cut's shallow but messy." He nodded. "Guess I was looking for a reason to come back." She didn't respond to the flirtation, not even a smirk, just reached for the antiseptic and said, "Try not to get injured next time. I don't do repeat performances." The sting from the solution drew a sharp inhale, but he didn't complain. "You're immune, huh?" he asked, eyes watching her more than her hands. To charm? Completely. For a moment silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "What happened?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now. Noah's expression darkened slightly. "Guy was harassing the waitress. I stepped in. He didn't like that." Liana paused, needle in hand, before continuing. "That was reckless." He met her eyes. "Maybe, but it felt right." And for a fleeting second, something flickered behind her calm demeanor, a soft recognition, the kind you don't speak aloud. She didn't argue, just gave a quiet, still reckless, as she placed the final stitch with gentle precision. And just like that, the curtain of the ER didn't feel so cold anymore. Noah offered a crooked grin, his voice light but tinged with something quieter underneath. "Admit it, you care, doctor." Liana peeled off her gloves with a practiced flick, not even sparing him a glance. "Hardly," she replied coolly. "But I do care about keeping you out of my ER." She turned her back to him, disposing of bloodied gauze and tools into a sterile bin. It was the perfect out. He could have thanked her, taken his discharge paperwork, and vanished back into the world that knew him too well. But something about her stillness, so composed yet distant, made him stay rooted to the gurney. "You ever stop playing savior?" he asked, trying for casual. She shot him a look, one brow lifting with sharp amusement. "Is that your way of asking if I have time to entertain a bored millionaire with a bruised ego?" He chuckled, undeterred. "I was thinking more like dinner, but sure, let's call it ego therapy." Liana almost smiled. "Almost. You need rest. No lifting, no running around, no getting into bar fights. Doctor's orders." Noah leaned back, folding his arms behind his head, eyes still locked on her. He hadn't expected tonight to matter. He'd walked in seeking a patch-up, a routine fix. But he was walking out with something stitched deeper than skin, an interest, a pull. And it had nothing to do with business or wealth or power. He wanted her, and not in the way he was used to wanting things. There was something about Liana Hart that quieted the noise in his mind. She didn't flinch, didn't fawn, didn't give in. She challenged, she endured. She stood still when everything else rushed by. She was, in every way, a mystery he couldn't look away from. 2 days later, Noah found himself outside a cafe tucked just off Kensley Avenue, not far from the hospital. The smell of fresh espresso mingled with the morning rush. It wasn't his kind of place. He wasn't the kind of man who waited. And yet, there he was, leaning against his obsidian black coupe, eyes on the cafe door like a man chasing something rare. He didn't have to wait long. She appeared right on time, coffee in hand, phone at her ear, her hair swept into a lazy bun that somehow made her look more put together than any red carpet he'd ever seen. She was mid-conversation, but the moment her eyes met his, her expression shifted into something between disbelief and reluctant amusement. She ended the call and walked straight toward him. "Please tell me you didn't stalk my schedule just to stand here looking smug." Noah smirked. "I prefer determined. Has a better ring to it." Liana took a slow sip of her coffee, eyeing him carefully. "And I prefer uninterested." "I don't buy that," he said, easy and quiet. She let out a breath through her nose, not quite a sigh. "Let me guess. You've already mapped it all out. You charm me, I fall for you. You lose interest by next Thursday." Noah tilted his head, the grin never quite fading. "That's a lot of projection, doctor." "I've met your kind," she said, arms crossed now, voice calm but firm. He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentler. "And what kind is that?" "The kind who thinks persistence earns them something." "I don't think I'm owed anything," Noah said, sincerity slipping in through the cracks. "But I do think you're curious, and that scares you more than you want to admit." Her face stayed unreadable, but something flickered just for a second in her eyes. "I don't have time for distractions," she said finally. "Neither do I," he replied. And to his surprise, she laughed, a real one this time, short, reluctant, but undeniably human. "You are exhausting," she said, shaking her head, "and infuriating." "And still, you're not walking away," Noah murmured. She glanced at her watch. 10 minutes. That's all I've got before I'm due back." He gestured toward a bench nearby. "Then let's not waste them." Without another word, she walked to the bench and sat down with a quiet sigh. Noah followed, the space between them filled with the hum of traffic and distant conversation. After a beat of silence, he turned to her. "What made you choose medicine?" Liana lifted her brow, but this time she didn't dodge the question. Liana raised an eyebrow, mildly amused. "That's your opener?" Noah's lips curved slightly. "Would you prefer something shallow?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched him with the quiet scrutiny of someone used to looking beyond surface-level charm. After a beat, she spoke, softly but with weight. "I wanted to fix things, fix people." There was no drama in her tone, just honesty. "I liked the idea that my presence could make something better, something real." Noah nodded, storing that away like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was building. "And do you still feel that way?" A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Most days." She looked at him then, as if considering whether to flip the question around. "And you? What made you choose all of this?" she asked, motioning vaguely at the tailored clothes, the expensive watch, the quiet confidence that clung to him like a second skin. "Business," he replied simply. "No," she said with a wry smirk. "Millionaire." He let out a low chuckle, tilting his head. "So you did Google me." She said nothing, just gave him a look that said she didn't need to confirm. "All right," he continued, his tone growing more serious. "I like control. I like knowing that, no matter what chaos is unfolding, I can shift the outcome. Power is clarity." She studied him again, closely, not with judgment, but curiosity, like she was slowly unraveling something tightly wound. "That sounds exhausting." His mouth twitched at the edge. "And what about you?" he countered. "You carry people's lives in your hands every day. Isn't that heavier?" Liana took a sip of her coffee before answering. "It is. But sometimes the weight reminds me that what I do matters, that it means something." For a moment, neither spoke. No clever comebacks, no flirtation. Just two people sitting side by side in a rare kind of understanding. Then she glanced at her watch and stood. "My break's over." Noah rose too, hands slipping into his pockets. "Dinner tonight?" She sighed softly, her eyes narrowing as she regarded him. "You really don't quit, do you?" "Not when something's worth the effort." There was a pause, a flicker of hesitation, and then, finally, she nodded once. "One dinner." A grin broke across his face. "I'll pick you up at 7. As she walked away, he watched her go with a strange ache in his chest. He'd chased a lot in his life, deals, numbers, acquisitions, but never something like this. For the first time in years, it felt like he wasn't just pursuing a moment. He was chasing meaning. At exactly 7, Noah pulled up in front of her apartment building. stepping out from behind the wheel of his own car. He rarely drove himself, rarely needed to. But tonight, he wanted no barriers, no pretense, just them. The door opened, and there she was. Liana stepped into view wearing a navy dress that didn't scream for attention, but earned it all the same. Her hair, usually tied back in hospital efficiency, now flowed in soft, easy waves. She looked like herself, but in a way he hadn't seen before. Effortless, honest, unknowingly beautiful. "You're punctual," she noted, walking toward him. "I don't like wasting time," he said simply. His gaze met hers, steady and sincere. "And tonight, I won't waste yours." She tilted her head slightly as if weighing his words. "Let's see if you live up to that." He opened the passenger door and waited as she stepped in before circling around to take the driver's seat. A few minutes into the drive, she glanced sideways. "So, where are we going?" "You'll see," he replied. Her brow lifted. "You do realize surprises only work when the other person actually likes surprises." He laughed under his breath. "You'll like this one." She didn't argue, but he caught the way her fingers tapped gently against her leg, an unconscious rhythm. He noted it, just like he'd noted the way her voice softened when she spoke about fixing people. Every detail mattered. 15 minutes later, he turned into a private entrance, pulling up beside a discreet valet station tucked beneath a rooftop garden. The valet opened her door, and as Liana stepped out, her eyes lifted to the terrace above. Warm strings of lights glowed like stars scattered across the city's canvas. Behind tall glass windows, a softly lit dining space revealed elegant tables tucked beneath leafy canopies, the world outside seeming far, far away. She looked at him then, curiosity flickering like the city lights in her eyes. "You don't really do simple, do you?" Liana asked, her voice light but edged with quiet curiosity. Noah offered a faint smile, extending his arm. "I do what works." For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then, with a subtle sigh, she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, letting him lead her forward. They stepped inside the softly lit restaurant, where city lights shimmered like stars beyond the glass. A materde guided them to a table tucked into a quiet corner, offering a panoramic view of Eastbrook City's skyline. It was private, warm, and far from ostentatious. As they sat, Liana unfolded her napkin, her face unreadable. "I have to admit," she said softly, "I was expecting something flashier. A rooftop club with a velvet rope, maybe somewhere with a 2-year wait list." Noah leaned back in his chair, relaxed. "I thought about it, but I figured you'd care more about good food than a status symbol." Her lips parted, as if caught off guard by how well he seemed to understand her. "Interesting guess," she murmured. "Accurate, though." She didn't elaborate further, just turned her attention to the menu. A few quiet minutes passed before she set it down and looked back at him. "You strike me as someone who believes he has people figured out." "It's helped me get where I am," Noah replied. Her eyes lingered on his, thoughtful. "And what happens when you're wrong?" He smiled faintly. "I rarely am." That earned a quiet laugh from her, genuine and a little exasperated. "Of course not." The waiter arrived and they gave their orders. When they were alone again, she leaned in slightly, studying him. "Tell me something I wouldn't know just by Googling you." Noah paused for a moment, then said, "I almost didn't go into business." That caught her attention. "No?" "I was meant to follow my father, law school, courtrooms, politics. But I couldn't see myself arguing someone else's case." He took a sip of his drink. "I needed something different. I needed to build something that was mine. Business gave me that. Freedom." Liana nodded slowly, as though piecing something together. "And now? You have everything you wanted?" Noah placed his glass down, fingers drumming lightly against the table. "Not everything." There was a flicker in her eyes, something soft, but the moment passed quickly as the appetizers arrived. Still, the energy between them shifted, lighter yet more present. They ate, conversation flowing more easily with each bite. What surprised him wasn't her intelligence. He'd seen that the moment they met. It was the ease with which she challenged him, the way she didn't care for his accomplishments or reputation. She wasn't impressed, and that, strangely, impressed him. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and looked at him. "I have a question." Noah gestured for her to continue. "Why me?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because you're not like anyone I've met before." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a line." He exhaled, leaning forward slightly. All right, because when I walked into that ER, you didn't see some headline or a bank account. You saw a man who was bleeding. You treated me like a person. You didn't flinch. You didn't care who I was." Liana didn't respond right away, and for the first time that evening, he saw her caught off guard. "And maybe," he added, quieter now, "I like the way you make me work for your attention." She looked down for a moment, her fingers brushing the edge of her plate as if grounding herself. "That's unfair," she said under her breath. Noah tilted his head. "Why? Because I'm not looking for whatever this is." He let that sit for a second, then nodded. "Fair enough," she blinked, almost surprised by how easily he accepted it. "But you're here," he continued, "which tells me part of you is curious." Liana let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "You really don't quit?" "No," he said softly, "I don't." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It lingered in the air between them like a shared secret neither of them was ready to name. Something unspoken, something quietly waiting. Eventually, Liana let out a soft sigh, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dinner was nice." Noah smiled, not pushing, just receiving her words with quiet appreciation. "That's something." As the evening unfolded, something in her posture softened. The tension that usually wrapped around her like armor began to loosen. And Noah? He wasn't just chasing attraction anymore. He was drawn to something far deeper. Something real. He wanted to know her in ways that went far beyond clever banter or fleeting moments. He hadn't expected this night to shift anything substantial. But as he walked beside her through the gently darkened streets of Eastbrook, her apartment building rising in the distance, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready to let her go. The city had quieted. The chaos of day fading into the hush of twilight. Street lamps cast long shadows as they walked side by side, his hands tucked in his pockets, fighting the growing urge to reach for her. There was a difference in her now. A slight change in the way she matched his pace, the way her gaze occasionally drifted his way, then back to the pavement. The walls were still there, but one of them had cracked, just enough to let something through. "You're quiet," she said at last, stealing a glance at him. "I'm thinking." She arched an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." He chuckled, low and soft. "Only if you're worried about where my thoughts might go." She shook her head, but he caught it. The slight pull at the corner of her lips, the hint of something she didn't quite want him to see. He loved that. The way she tried to hold him at arm's length and still couldn't help but lean in, just a little. At her doorstep, she paused, keys in hand. For a moment, she didn't move. Noah stood beside her, silent, waiting. "Tonight was," she began, then stopped. He turned toward her gently. "Better than expected," he offered. She nodded, almost reluctantly. "A little. I'll take that as a win." Liana rolled her eyes but didn't step inside. Instead, she bit her lower lip as if weighing something in her chest. Noah didn't say a word. "I meant what I said," she murmured. "I wasn't looking for this." He nodded, steady as ever. "I know. She hesitated. "Maybe I don't need to have all the answers right now." He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly across hers. "Then, don't." She exhaled slowly, the weight in her shoulders easing just slightly. "Good night, Noah." "Good night, Liana." She turned, opened the door, and just before it closed behind her, she glanced back. It was brief, but he saw it. Hope. Fleeting but unmistakable. And that was enough. The days that followed passed quietly, but something unspoken lingered between them. Liana didn't push him away, and Noah didn't pull too hard. He just stayed, present in small, deliberate ways. A warm coffee waiting at her favorite cafe after a long shift. A handwritten note left with the barista, "Keep going. You're doing more than you know." No grand gestures, just the kind of attentiveness that was rare in his world, and rarer still in hers. And Liana, despite herself, began to let go. Not all at once, but enough. One night, after an endless day in the ER, Liana stood beneath the sterile glow of the hospital's awning, exhaustion pooling in her bones. She wasn't sure what moved her. Maybe it was the silence, maybe the need for something human, but her hand reached for her phone before she could talk herself out of it. She dialed the number she hadn't meant to memorize. "Noah," she said when he answered. His voice was immediate, warm. "Liana." She hesitated. "I don't know why I called." "You don't have to know," he replied without missing a beat. "Where are you?" "The hospital." "Stay there." "Noah," she began, already protesting. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. She stared at the phone in her hand, torn between frustration and something far more dangerous, anticipation. Exactly 10 minutes later, his car pulled up. It wasn't his driver this time. It was him, stepping out in a dark, tailored suit, like he just walked out of a boardroom and into her orbit without a second thought. Liana crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. Did you seriously leave something important just because I called? Noah shrugged, his voice calm. You called. That makes it important. She didn't respond right away, but for the first time that day, her chest felt a little lighter. Her shoulders tensed instinctively at his voice. Noah, just get in the car, Liana. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she exhaled, like surrendering something she'd been holding too tightly, and slipped into the passenger seat beside him. They didn't speak as he drove. The city flowed past them in blurs of gold and shadow, headlights casting soft shapes on her tired features. But the silence wasn't awkward. It felt safe, like both of them needed the quiet more than words. Eventually, Noah pulled into a secluded overlook above the city. Below them, Eastbrook stretched out in a sea of shimmering lights, alive and distant. Liana stared out the window, her voice almost lost in the hush. You didn't have to do this. I did, he replied. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. Why? Noah leaned forward, resting his forearm on the wheel, his voice steady and low. Because I know you, Liana. I know when you're holding too much, when you won't let yourself breathe. He nodded toward the view, the expanse of the city breathing beneath them. So, breathe. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her began to unravel, thread by thread. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Noah reached across the space between them, gently taking her hand. Then let me show you. And in that moment, the last of her resistance melted into his touch. The weeks that followed weren't flawless. Liana still kept pieces of herself guarded, still flinched when emotions came too close. And Noah, for all his patience, still had a way of disarming her in ways she hadn't prepared for. But somehow, between late-night phone calls and quiet glances stolen in busy hallways, they found something neither had dared to name. Something honest, something real. One evening, on the balcony of Noah's penthouse, the sky bruised with twilight, Liana leaned against the railing, her gaze lost in the pulse of the city. I used to think love was for other people, she said quietly. Noah stepped behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, grounding her. And now? He asked. She turned to face him, resting her hands on his chest. Now, I think I was wrong. He reached up, brushing his thumb along her cheek. His voice was low, like a promise wrapped in certainty. You were. And when he kissed her, slow, deep, without urgency, she kissed him back with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. But love, Noah was learning, wasn't just in the chase, it was in the quiet after. He stood alone in his office one morning, city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Normally, decisions came easy. His life was a chain of calculated moves and steady ambition. But Liana had changed everything. He had spent weeks tearing down her walls, brick by brick, showing her he wasn't just another name, another passing storm. Now that she had let him in, now that she was his in all the ways that mattered, he felt something foreign coil in his chest. Fear. What if he didn't know how to keep her? A sharp knock pulled him from the spiral. Come in, he said, turning as Daniel, his assistant, stepped inside. There's someone here to see you, Daniel said cautiously. Noah frowned. I don't have anything scheduled. Daniel hesitated. It's her father. The word stopped him cold. Every muscle in his body tensed. Liana's father? Daniel nodded once. Yes, sir. He's waiting in the conference room. Noah didn't hesitate. He crossed the office in seconds, mind racing. Liana had only mentioned her father once, casually, vaguely, enough for him to sense distance, strain. It wasn't a name she said with warmth. When Noah stepped into the conference room, the man was already seated, posture sharp and composed. He had Liana's eyes, same color, same weight, but there was something harder behind them. A kind of calculation that put Noah instantly on guard. He closed the door behind him and took a seat across the table. Mr. Hart, he said evenly, choosing his words with care. The older man studied him for a long moment, his silence deliberate, his eyes sharp with scrutiny. I assume you know who I am. Noah met his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. I know you're Liana's father. That's all I need to know. Mr. Hart let out a quiet, almost amused exhale. That's a reckless perspective, Mr. Caldwell. I make it a point to know exactly who's involving themselves in my daughter's life. Noah leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. And what is it, exactly, that concerns you? Mr. Hart's fingers tapped rhythmically on the table as he inhaled through his nose. Liana is focused, disciplined. She spent years building her life with intention. The last thing she needs is a distraction. Noah's jaw tightened at the word. If you think I'm a distraction, then you don't know your daughter nearly as well as you think. Mr. Hart's gaze narrowed, his tone cool and cutting. I know her well enough to know relationships have never been her priority, and I find it difficult to believe that's changed now, suddenly, and without reason. Noah resisted the sharp retort pressing at the back of his throat. Instead, he drew a slow, calming breath. Liana and I, what we have isn't something to be examined like a quarterly report. She's not a number, and I'm not here to play games with her. There was a long pause before Mr. Hart leaned forward, the edge in his voice still present. You're a man who's used to getting what he wants. That much is obvious, but my daughter isn't like the women I imagine you're familiar with. She doesn't play by anyone else's rules. Noah's eyes didn't move, his voice stayed steady. I don't want her to. Another pause, this time quieter, more calculating. Then I suppose, Mr. Hart murmured, we'll see how long that lasts. Noah stood, brushing down his jacket with calm precision. If you came here to scare me off, he said, you've wasted your time. Mr. Hart rose as well, his expression as flat and unreadable as before. Consider it free advice, then. Noah didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out, his mind already with her. That evening, he picked Liana up from the hospital. She stepped into the passenger seat, exhaustion written across her face, her posture slightly slumped. Long day, she sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. Noah glanced at her, his grip unconsciously tightening on the steering wheel. Anything I can do? She turned to look at him, a faint smile finding its way through the weariness. You're already doing it. And with that, something shifted in him. A quiet peace settled deep in his chest, one he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He took her to the penthouse, where dinner waited in quiet warmth. The city lights blinked softly through the windows as they ate, conversation flowing with ease. Her guard, so often present like a shadow, seemed to loosen in the soft glow of the dining room. Later, they moved to the balcony. The night stretched wide before them, Eastbrook glowing below like a living constellation. Liana leaned against the railing, the breeze playing with her hair. You're quiet tonight, she said, glancing sideways at him. Noah stepped beside her, his voice lower now. Just thinking. She turned to face him fully, curious. About what? He hesitated, just for a moment, then reached for her hand, holding it with a gentle certainty. About how I've never met anyone like you. She let out a soft laugh, the kind that danced at the edge of disbelief. I think you've said that before. I know, but I mean it. He squeezed her hand. Liana, I know you weren't looking for this, and I know you don't have all the answers yet. She looked at him carefully, something unspoken flickering behind her eyes. So where do you think this is going? Noah stepped closer, his voice unwavering now, quiet but full of clarity. Wherever you'll let it, Noah said softly. Liana let out a slow breath, her eyes searching his. That's a dangerous thing to say to someone like me. He brushed his thumb gently over the back of her hand, his gaze steady. I like a little danger. For the first time that evening, she laughed, a real one, quiet and warm. You're impossible. And you're worth it. Noah replied without hesitation. She didn't argue. Instead, she stepped closer, resting her head gently against his chest. Noah wrapped his arms around her, holding her like he meant it, with a stillness that said he wasn't going anywhere. Whatever doubts her father had tried to plant in his mind, they faded in that moment. Because this was real. Later that night, as he sat in the back of his car, watching the lights of Eastbrook blur past the window, something unfamiliar gnawed at him. Noah Caldwell had always been decisive, clear, confident. But Liana had let him in slowly, carefully, offering pieces of herself like fragile glass. And though she was with him, he could still feel it. The part of her she kept guarded. It was in the way she changed the subject when he spoke of the future. The way she hesitated when things edged too close to vulnerable. He knew patience wasn't his strong suit, but for her, He was learning. Still, the echo of her father's words clung to the corners of his thoughts. He didn't care about approval, but he did care about her. And the last thing he wanted was for her to feel like he was taking over a life she had fought to build on her own terms. The following evening, Noah stepped into the lobby of St. Emery's, cutting through the usual hum of voices and footsteps with quiet purpose. He'd called ahead, making sure she was on break. He found her in the staff lounge, slumped slightly over a table, a paper coffee cup cradled between her tired hands. She looked up in surprise when the door opened. "Noah?" He walked over and placed a small brown bag in front of her. "Figured you deserved something better than vending machine snacks." Liana raised an eyebrow as she peeked inside, pulling out a perfectly wrapped sandwich. "Bribing the cafeteria now? I have my ways." A faint smile tugged at her lips as she took a bite. "You really don't have to do this." "I know," he said, watching her closely, "but I want to." She hesitated, chewing slowly before placing the sandwich down. "You're always doing things like this." Noah leaned against the table, arms folded. "Is that a problem?" She looked down at her hands, then shook her head. "No, it's just new." He exhaled, his voice softer now. "Liana, do you ever ask yourself why it's so hard to let someone take care of you?" Her shoulders tensed at the question, but he didn't back down. "I'm not saying you need me to," he continued gently. "I know you're strong. I know you've built your life piece by piece. But letting someone in doesn't mean surrendering control. It just means you don't have to carry it all alone." Her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "I've never been good at that," she admitted. Noah reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over hers. "Then let me help you learn." She didn't pull away. Instead, she released a slow breath, her voice quieter now. I don't want to lose myself in this." "You won't," he said, voice steady and sure. "I don't want to change who you are, Liana. I just want to stand beside you while you keep being exactly who you are." She looked up, meeting his gaze, and this time something shifted, a softening, a surrender. Not of herself, but of the fear that she couldn't be loved without conditions. She exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "You make it sound so easy." Noah chuckled softly, the corners of his mouth lifting in that quiet, knowing way. "It's not easy," he said, "but that doesn't mean it's not worth it." Liana took another bite of her sandwich, chewing thoughtfully before speaking again. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not when it comes to you." She looked up, something warm flickering in her gaze. Then, wordlessly, she reached across the table, her fingers slipping between his. And in that moment, Noah knew, with a clarity he'd never felt in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals, that he had just gained something far more valuable than anything he'd ever built. The weeks passed, and the shift between them was undeniable. Liana no longer hesitated when he reached for her hand. She didn't flinch when he spoke about the future. And Noah, a man who had spent his entire life trusting logic over emotion, found himself certain of only one thing. One crisp afternoon, he stood outside a small boutique nestled along a quiet street, watching the display of engagement rings through the glass. Inside, rows of delicate designs sparkled under soft golden light. He had never imagined he'd be the kind of man to agonize over something like this. But this wasn't just a ring. This was her. And that made every detail matter. When he found a design, simple, elegant, with a brilliant cut diamond set in a band that seemed made to hold light, he knew. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't a calculated move. This was love. This was certainty. That evening he picked her up and drove her to a hidden garden overlooking the city. Twinkling lights hung like fireflies in the trees, casting a soft glow on the stone path beneath their feet. Liana looked around, her curiosity blooming into a smile. "What is all this?" Noah reached for her hand, leading her gently to the center of the clearing. "Something I've been planning for a while." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing with playful suspicion. "Noah, are you about to?" But before she could finish, he was already lowering to one knee. Her breath caught. One hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, shining. Noah looked up at her, his voice steady, sure. "I've spent my life knowing exactly what I want," he began, "and then you came into it and changed everything. You made me want things I never thought I needed." Liana's eyes shimmered in the glow of the lights. "I don't want to spend another day without you," he said. "So, Liana Hart, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then came the smile, radiant, unstoppable. "Yes," she whispered. Noah slipped the ring onto her finger, rising to his feet just in time for her to throw her arms around him. He held her tightly, his heart pressing against hers, steady and full. When she pulled back, she looked at the ring, then up at him. "You really don't do anything halfway, do you?" He laughed quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not when it comes to you." Then she kissed him, slow, certain, full of everything they had become. The wedding was nothing like the world he'd once lived in. No guest lists filled with status, no flash, no spectacle. Just them, surrounded by the few people who truly mattered. Liana wore a simple white dress, her hair falling softly around her shoulders, her eyes glowing as she walked toward him. Noah's chest tightened as her hands found his. The officiant spoke, but the words blurred. All he could see was her. All he could feel was the truth of this moment. When it came time to speak, his voice didn't falter. "I promise to stand beside you, to challenge you, to support you. I promise to love you with everything I have, just as you are." Her hands trembled slightly in his, but her voice was clear. "I promise to let you in, to trust you, to build something real with you. I promise to love you without fear." And when they kissed, sealing the promises between them, there was no hesitation left. She was his, and he was hers, completely. And sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't arrive in fireworks, but in quiet, patient moments that grow into something unshakably real.